Hello, Namaskaram and welcome to yet another session of Meri Bhasha, Meri Pehchan. On behalf of the Consul General of India, Frankfurt, I would like to welcome you to our initiative Meri Bhasha, Meri Pehchan. This year is a very significant year for us. We are celebrating 75 years of Indian independence. On this occasion, the Consulate General of India, Frankfurt, has launched this initiative where we would be promoting the different languages of India. India has around 100 spoken languages, and of this, 22 languages have been included in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. In today's session, we will be focusing on the language Malayalam. Malayalam is spoken by the southernmost state of Kerala, and it is a language which has a very rich cultural heritage and also a very independent nature. For today's session, I have the privilege of introducing you to our eminent guest, Ms. Anjali George. Anjali is a writer and a speaker. She is well versed in Indian culture and traditions. Anjali is very active in Indian cultural initiatives in Frankfurt City. Thank you, Anjali. Welcome to the series. And I have with me Mr. Arun Somadathan. Arun is a professional, a project manager. He is an avid reader, passionate about Indian history and culture. And thank you, Arun, for coming for this session. Today, as I told you, we would be speaking about the language Malayalam. The language Malayalam is spoken by around 34 million people around the world. For beginning our discussion, I would like to ask you, Arun, what is the origin or the history of this beautiful Dravidian language?
Sure. First of all, I wish everyone a happy 75 years of independence, and glad to have this opportunity to present Malayalam here. So going over to your question, now how can we kind of define the evolution or explain the evolution of Malayalam as it is? I'll touch base on a couple of historical points that is recorded over time, and I'll go through the timeline of how this is. Now, for easier understanding, I would divide this phase between pre-16th century and post-16th century. Now, why am I using the 16th century timeline is because what we see as modern Malayalam, the Malayalam that we speak, evolved or took birth by 16th century when the poet Pehchan had introduced Malayalam alphabets and the Malayalam language as we see it today. And pre-16th century is a phase where this language was trying to create an identity of its own by influences of the Dravidian roots and also influences from Sanskrit. So that mix was trying to churn up a new language, so to say. So coming to the timeline, I would start this from around 800 AD. 800 is that period where we have most of the linguists and the archaeologists have recovered different inscriptions from temples, that is stone inscriptions, and also copper plate inscriptions where the script was being used. Now, most of these details that they collected from this was not just how the script was, but also you also received information about the dynasties that ruled over this particular period. So that includes the main Kudashekara dynasty, and we got even names of different kings in these particular documents that we've got. Now, what was inside in these contents, they were mainly details about the normal transactions that was happening, administrative details, etc. And these copper plates also had details about the deeds and agreements that were signed between rulers and merchants who came over. Now, notable among them is the Tarisapalli Cheppeda, which is a deed signed between a Venad ruler and a Christian merchant who came in, and that was a land deed. Then you had the Varapalli Cheppeda, is another copper plate inscription, also a transactional detail. And you also have many temples, like in Alapura, you have the Kandiyu temple, Haripada temple, nearby Changanaseri, you have the Trikodidhanam temples, where on the floors and on the walls you have these inscriptions. So by 800, 900, you have all these information available. And by 10th to 11th century AD is this period where also Sanskrit was also coming into this region. So now you have this mix of this old Tamil from where this was coming and also the new language called Sanskrit that is also coming in. So there was demand for change in the script, etc. So let me pause over there and move into the script part of this. So we are pausing at 10th, 11th century and moving into the script portion. So the script that we are talking about is called Vattelta script. And there were also two other variations called as the Koleithu and Malayanma, and there are also some local script dialects. So most predominantly what these documents that these inscriptions that we see in is written in this Vattelta script. Now there is one linguistic historian who mentions that this is called Vettelta because you are actually cutting on stone or copper to write this. So that's why Vettelta came up. And the Koleithu script is basically by using nails or coal to cut on palm strips to write. So that's why Koleithu. So these were the scripts that were being used. Now, as I said, when Sanskrit also came in, the language was different. So there was consonants that was not used between the old Malayalam and Sanskrit. So a new requirement for a new script came up. So the Pallava kings at that time, they introduced a new script called the Grantha script. Some historians also call this as a Pallava Grantha script. Now this had a more liberal approach in mixing and matching letters between old Malayalam and Sanskrit into this. So coming back to our timeline, by this time, since Sanskrit came in and there was also requirement for literary works, you have the first initial works called the Manipravalam works, which is a mix of Malayalam and Sanskrit. So that built up the whole movement of having also written activities, literature in Malayalam. And by this time, since Sanskrit was just arriving and there wasn't, the masses were still used to an older language, you still had to reach to them. So that's when by 12th, 13th century in middle Malayalam region, you had the poet called Chiraman, that is how he calls his name in this book. He translated Ramayana into Malayalam, and that was called Ramacharitam. Now if you look at most of the Indian languages, their evolution or the first initial literary works comes with translating these epics, either Mahabharatam, Ramayanam or Gita, Bhagavad Gita. So the same was done by Chiraman. So what he did is he picked up one particular chapter, the Yuddha Kantam of this, and he wrote this in the middle Malayalam that was being formed. And then subsequently also you had in the next couple of centuries, you also had three poets. They are known as the Kannasha Kavigal. They also started translating these epics, Mahabharatam, Bhagavad Gita, and also the complete Ramayana into Malayalam. So that started off this whole movement, and by this time Middle Malayalam was being used in this. Now today, if you read these scriptures, for us, a normal Malayali, it may sound or seem like Tamil, but if you ask this to a Tamil person, for them it may not look like the Tamil that is there. So that was a mix and match that was being used. And as I said, you also had same time Manipravalam works, which was a mix of Malayalam and Sanskrit. So by this time we are reaching by 15th century, and at this period there is also another poet called Cherusheri who writes Krishna Gatha, which is again his version of Bhagavatam that we have, and that is the starting point which is used as a base by 16th century by Eilthachan to create the new language. So we've reached 16th century where the stalwart Tunjatha Eilthachan picks up this Grantha script that we told before. He takes it into this version and he builds these new letters. So the 52 alphabets that he started off with is what has evolved to what we have Malayalam today. So by 16th century, we have this modern Malayalam being built up. And then there was this new set of writers who are coming in based on the demands of how society is changing. So you had Poondanam, who was writing a lot about, till now we were hearing only epics being written. Now Poondanam was a writer who came in and started writing about the little things of life or the societal things of life. And even today, I would say, if you read his writings, it has a lot of validity with what we are seeing around us. So those were like the far thought of rights that he used to write of those days. And then you also had other art forms also coming into the picture. So Kathakali was getting more prominence and other classical arts. So then you had writings related to this, like Atta Kathakal written by Unnai Warrior. and you had the Vanji particle by Ramamurtha Warrior and all also coming into picture. And by this time, we've reached almost 18th century, where Kunjan Nambiar is also the next person who've contributed a lot into the satire culture of Kerala. So he kind of brought in all aspects about what is not right with society and all in his writings. And I think if there is a Malayalam student, they must have learned at least one or two lines of Kunjan Nambiar. And so that was his movement that came up. And there was also this, just like the satire style that he introduced, there was also a set of poets called as the Vemmani school of poets who introduced humor into their writing, and that was also in simple Malayalam into their writing. So this was also by 18th century. So by this time you should understand that we had influence of Portuguese coming in, and by the end we had the Anjali Treaty. So by this time Britishers have also arrived and their influence is coming in. So I think that is a good part where we could now transition to then what happened after that and how did the movement come in, with this political developments happening in Kerala. Yeah.
That's extremely very interesting how you have showed the journey of Malayalam throughout these centuries. So when we talk about the evolution process, could you, Anjali, explain to our viewers what has happened in terms of development in the language Malayalam in the previous century, in the recent past?
Yeah, Arun has very well described the evolution of Malayalam language till in the end of 18th century. So almost that time there has been a real lag or a reduction in the there wasn't much literary activities because that was a bit of a turbulent time in the Kerala's history. So too much of new production of literary works didn't happen much. But then then came if we really speak, the modern day of Malayalam language, which really started what we see now, So the three factors influenced this modernization, which are, one is introduction of printing, the contact with the European missionaries, and also in introduction of the development of journalism, the print media. So I would explain about these aspects and how it influenced the language and also the oral traditions. Mm-hmm. So the Travancore kings, Swati Tirunal and all also have been very enthusiastic in modernization of the education system of Malayalam, and they have appointed A.R. Rajaraja Varma for reviewing and modernizing the Malayalam education. So he, with this work, he codified a grammatical text called Kerala Paniniyam. Mm-hmm. And besides that, there has been a development of several grammatical texts, work on Malayalam grammar in the early end of 18th century and early 19th century. And the main one of the contribution was by Dr. Hermann Gundert, who was a German missionary. He wrote, and then also printing. Printing came in at that time, mainly with the Christian missionaries who wanted to print Bible and propagate the religion. So first Bible was printed in Rome in 1770s, and also in one Gujarati named Bhimji established a printing press in Kochi. And also in Bombay, from Bombay Courier Press, another one Bible was printed. And meanwhile, many periodicals and also literary magazines were printed in Malayalam. So, for example, Bhasha Poshani by Kandathil Varghese Mappala, and also Vengayil Kunjiraman Nair, who was also known as Kesari. He, with the pseudonym Kesari, he wrote, and he started writing essays. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, there was also translations of various plays from various languages, from Sanskrit as well as from the Western plays also has been translated into Malayalam. For example, the Kalidasa's Abhijnana Shakuntalam was translated into Malayalam by Kerala Varma Valiyakoi Tamburan. And many other plays from also got translated. And this all inspired more and more people to adopt new techniques of writing. And novel was before there was not much novel writing in Malayalam. Then Appu Nedungadi wrote a novel Kundalada, but it wasn't really completely in a novel shape. Then O. Chandu Menon wrote Induleka, which is considered to be the first well-versed novel in Malayalam. So as I told, the printing also affected the development of the Malayalam script. Like later, what earlier Arun talked about the development of the Malayalam script till the time, but the Malayalam script as we see now, that had got some that we reached into that point after certain transformation which happened because of the development of printing process. So the first, as I told, a whole book which was printed first was Bible, but beforehand itself, if we say like the first Malayalam word was printed or being printed on a book was actually by botanical text Hortus Malabaricus, which is a Latin work made by the Dutch, but the Malayalam names of the plants has been printed in Malayalam. But in Kerala, the actual printing happened in Kerala when the Benjamin Bailey printed a Bible in Kerala, and he chose to use the Patteluthu script, the round script. And later, also the government, after a while, in 1967, government of Kerala decided to revise the Malayalam script and appointed a commission headed by Professor Shuranad Kunyanpilla, and that called Malayalam Script Revision Commission, which their recommendation was accepted by all the major newspapers also, and that then in 1971 onwards, government adopted the new script, and this script is what we are using right now. And as I told, the printing also influenced the development of journalism. Kerala is the land with the largest media exposure in India. So that much influence journalism or the print media had in the evolution of language and literature, and also in the freedom movement, and even now also the Malayalis or the people of Kerala are very much well connected with the news media. So if we talk about the development of the journalism, Dr. Herman Gundar started one newspaper or magazine called Rajya Samacharam. And then in North, Murkut Kumaran and also Appu Nedungadi, they started new newspapers, and also the famous newspapers which are still running, Malayalam Manorama, Madhrubhumi, Kerala Kaumudi, these all were started, and they all encouraged new styles of writing, prose and poetry. There were another one newspaper called Swadesh Abhimani, which was very significant during the freedom movement.
Interesting. It is very interesting to hear how the language Malayalam has developed over the past century, and to hear how the influence of Europeans or European culture has seeped into the development of the language.
If I can add on that, because these European missionaries who came, they were already mostly professors at universities over here, and even as Herman Gundert, He also picked up a lot of script